Movies are not $100 million therapy, said the director of one movie about being a new parent, one movie about a child's difficulty with emotional regulation, and two movies about death. Hey, folks, I don't ask why it's green. Green's in my mind because I'm filming this on St. Patrick's Day, but of course it's not going to go out on St. Patrick's Day. Anyways, I want to talk about Pete Docter, who is the Chief Creative Officer at Pixar, who said something really foolish relatively recently. And he was appropriately dunked on for that. But I actually want to really truly dig in to what it is he said and put it in proper context, because as much as people were annoyed with him, it did seem to largely be making fun of him. I am actually genuinely angry. So while I will do my best to keep everything in check and respectful, and note right here at the beginning, do not harass this man. Do not add him on social media. Do not find out a bunch of information about him that isn't already public. Leave him alone. We can criticize someone without harassing them. Criticism is not harassment, so don't bring harassment to this party. Okay? But first, a quick word from our sponsor, which is my own Patreon. Yeah, I know, it's tacky, but I don't get standard sponsors very often, and I'm experimenting with putting this a little bit sooner. You do get a lot of perks for supporting my Patreon. At any level of support, you will get ad-free versions of the main channel videos. You will get early access to those videos, anywhere from a few days to multiple weeks, depending on the video and how I'm doing on my schedule. You will get to see my docket a month in advance. At $2 or more, you will get access to the Council of Geeks Discord, and there are additional perks beyond that. Names in the credits, actual shouting you out at the end, etc., etc. If you find any of that interesting or just want to support me, I really encourage you to check out the Patreon. Things are a little bit tighter than I would like them to be, and every little bit helps. Thank you very much. All right. So if you missed it, during an interview with the Wall Street Journal, Pete Docter of Pixar said, well, he said a few things, but the thing that went viral was when he addressed the issue of the queer coding being removed from the movie Elio by saying, quote, "We're making a movie, not hundreds of millions of dollars in therapy." Now, as I said, I'm actually genuinely upset, although less about that quote, which was the thing that went viral because it's a very foolish thing that he said. We'll talk about why real quick, because it is kind of funny just how absurd that statement is, especially coming from him. But I am going to want to dig into a lot more than that, but let's start there. A little bit of context first. Pete Docter has been at Pixar for a long time. He joined the company back in 1990 and contributed to the writing of Toy Stories 1 and 2. He became the first person other than John Lasseter to direct a film for Pixar, and that was Monsters, Inc. He would then go on to direct Up and Inside Out. He would take over the Chief Creative Officer position after Lasseter left in the wake of some sexual harassment allegations in 2018, and he's been in that position ever since, although he managed to get out one more movie because he had started it before assuming that position, and that was Soul. Now, I know I already named the movies that he has personally directed, but let's actually just take a quick second and go over, one by one, the filmography of the man who said that movies are not hundreds of millions of dollars of therapy. Monsters, Inc., aka the joy and fear that comes with becoming responsible for a small child, the movie, coincidentally, I'm sure, conceived in the wake of Docter's first child being born. Up, aka Grief and Loneliness, the movie, the first 12 minutes of which have probably been used by an entire generation for emotional relief because they can't afford actual therapy. Inside Out, aka Emotions of the Developing Mind Are Hard, the movie, written in direct consult with multiple psychologists and other experts in the field and inspired by Docter's own kids. And then Soul, aka processing the fact that you can die without reaching your full potential, and also we need to be prepared to step aside for the next generation, the movie. If there was ever a poster child for movies are his therapy, Pete Docter might not be the best candidate, but he'd be on the short list for sure. Like, just that dismissive tone in general, just the notion of it is absurd. Of course, artists, creators, writers, directors, designers, costume designers, everybody involved will channel some aspect of their personal life into their work. And many of them will use it as a way to process stuff that they either have processed in the past but think it could yield artistic results, or the art itself is a way to help them process it. Others who may not even recognize what it is they're doing can still end up creating a piece of art that is cathartic for other people who have similar life experiences that the creators are drawing on and putting onto film. Yeah, it kinda is $100 million worth of therapy if you're trying to make anything with meaning as opposed to just mindless entertainment. And Pete Docter clearly has wanted to make things that meant something, that had something to say. His director's filmography is made up of 4 very good movies. But of course, there was something different about Elio, wasn't there? As I alluded to already, he didn't just say this out of nowhere. This was said as a response within the context of being asked about the reported removal of deliberate queer and gay coding of the lead character in the movie Elio. Now, this is something that has already been documented for a bit. I don't think I've actually talked about it before. When the main story came out, it was kind of a big deal, but I had other stuff going on and didn't get around to it. But yeah, the movie Elio, which I have never seen, it came out last year and it was okay by most accounts. One of the common criticisms is it doesn't seem to have much of anything going on. There isn't a deeper meaning. There isn't a lot of depth to it. Well, there was depth in it before. The original director had instilled a lot of his own personal experiences growing up into the character of Elio. Now, Elio was not in the movie originally explicitly gay. He wasn't demonstrated as having a crush on another boy, but a lot of the aspects of the director, who was gay, were instilled into him. That sense of otherness that he felt because he didn't feel like the other kids was in the character, making him gay-coded and informed by gay experiences. And that was what was removed at the request of Docter and people in his kind of position. Now, I can't say definitively whether or not that stuff worked. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I can't prove that it was a better movie before these changes were made. The reports were that it didn't test very well, but then the decision was made that the best way to fix that was to just purge all of these elements as opposed to find a way to make them work better. But whatever. I don't know that it was a better movie with the gay coding. But I do know it was a movie that had more meaning to it, and you just stripped that meaning out. And Pete Docter has chosen to justify this by claiming the original version was somehow $100 million worth of therapy. Pete, how are your films, which have had budgets ranging from $115 to $175 million, how are they not therapy or expressions of the kinds of things you would go to therapy to deal with? How are they not? But that was. What was different? It was gay. Now, before I go much further down this road, I'm going to grant right now, Pete Docter probably had no intention of becoming the current face of the purging and oppressing and censoring of queer coding and queer ideas at Pixar in specific or Disney in general. But he opened his mouth and he became that regardless. So we're going to move forward because, lest we forget, Elio was not the only thing that happened. The Pixar-produced series Win or Lose was set to have a trans character, was in fact voiced by a trans actor. Now, the character technically still appears in the show. The character even still has a dedicated episode in the series, but there were multiple scenes that were planned that would deal with the fact that she is trans and make that as a core part of her story and her episodes. Those scenes were storyboarded, they were planned, but they were never actually made, and any and all reference to her being trans was expunged and removed so that nothing appeared in the final product. So, Pete, you are now deciding that these things shouldn't be put out there. Not by you, at the very least. And this is where I want to emphasize something that he said other than just the therapy line. Now, the therapy line, as I said, was punchy enough to go viral and get dunked on. But let's talk about what he said in the lead up to that. It took me a little bit to find more exact quotes because Wall Street Journal has a frickin' paywall and I'm not giving them money. But here's what I could find. He expressed concern about parents going to see these movies and taking their kids, and he did not want to make films that, quote, force them to have a conversation they weren't ready for with their children. And this is what I actually want to focus on. Because the therapy line, easy to dunk on and borderline funny as it is, this is the sentiment that leads to legitimate silencing of queer voices for whatever part of the queer community you might be. Gay, lesbian, bi, trans, non-binary, whatever it is. This sentiment will pretty much guarantee your silence when it's coming from somebody in charge. And it is honestly insidious that a line like that he's worried about forcing an uncomfortable conversation, frames the erasure and silencing of queer voices as a courtesy done to the audience, to the parents of kids. Except the thing is, it's a courtesy done to a very specific kind of parent. What if a parent actually wants their kid to have some touchstone on being gay or trans or non-binary or anything else? Maybe it's because the parent themselves are that. Maybe it's because they believe their child might be that, or the child has already expressed things that indicate to the parent that they are one of those things. Or maybe the parent is cisgender and the kid is cisgender, but the parent still wants the kid to be exposed to some degree of queerness because that exists in the real world and it helps to prepare a child to exist in that world and tolerate other people and be kind and sociable if there are pieces of media that parent can point to and go, oh, well, it's like this thing. Does that help you better understand? You are deciding that the parents who do not want to have a conversation about those things, that their desires override any other possible desires of any parent in the audience. And I'm sure for him, it's a numbers game. More parents are going to be cisgender and heterosexual, or at least present themselves as such, and believe that their children are those things as well. How many of those people actually are uncomfortable having those conversations? I don't know. I have no idea what the stats are on that. That's another big presumption of people like Pete. But here's a couple of things about that. First of all, why is discussing the existence of somebody being gay, or in the case of what was in Elio, somebody just being gay coded, not even explicitly gay, why does that result in an uncomfortable conversation that parents shouldn't be forced to have when you made 2 movies about death? You made a movie in which a couple is shown getting together, being happily married, and then being deprived of some of the keys that so much of other media shows are the standard measures of happiness. They can't have a kid. There is an implication indeed of a miscarriage. How many parents do you think want to have that conversation with their kids? And then, let's be very clear about this, Carl does all this and goes up to go on the falls to die. He's not planning to come back. He's not planning to go on an adventure and learn a lesson. He's going there to die. The implications of a movie like Up, you are fine with parents having to have potentially uncomfortable conversations about death and grief, but not being gay. That's the first thing. Here's the other one. Why do you assume that's an uncomfortable conversation? Now, this is a point that extends well past Pete Docter, but here's my question to anybody who insists that, like, look, we shouldn't have to have these conversations. These are uncomfortable conversations. These are awkward conversations. And I don't think they should be had. This is me speaking anecdotally, but as a parent, as someone whose friends are also parents. Not all my friends, but a good chunk of them. It's actually not hard to explain to kids. It's incredibly easy. Especially if we're just sticking with Elio, the idea of a kid being gay. Some boys like boys, some girls like girls, some people like everybody. It really is that simple. It only becomes complicated if, in addition to communicating those basic facts, you also think it's important to instill into your child that it's not okay to be those things. That makes it very complicated, because if it's not just a matter of you having to explain logistically what gay people are, again, it's the easiest thing in the world. Boys who love boys, girls who love girls, people who love either one. That's it. That's it. That's literally it. That is everything. But it becomes complicated if you also need to go, and here's why that's not okay. Whatever your justification might be for your discomfort with that. It only becomes a complicated conversation if you need to instill a sense of wrongness or guilt around that idea. Because if you don't, it's super easy, barely an inconvenience, and it is absurd that you treat it like a massive burden. But let's come back to Up and Soul again really quickly, because as I said, those are movies about death. And as I already kind of said, like, why do you think it's okay to force conversations on parents that they're now going to have to talk to their kids about death, but not gayness? Now, I'm sure some people, maybe Pete, or maybe just people who want to argue the point, are going to go, well, death is a part of life. Kids need to learn about that at some point. Cool. So are queer people. Any given kid themselves might turn out to be queer. Gay, trans, non-binary, whatever it might be. But even if they don't, queer people exist. So why do you think that it's acceptable to have parents have to talk to their kids about death, because death is a reality, but not to have parents talk to their kids about gay people? Gay people are a reality too. They exist. Queer people exist. And if you do not give a child the tools to understand that, that is when it becomes confusion. Because again, unless you have already instilled and hammered in to a child the ideas of there are only boys and girls, all boys like girls, all girls like boys, unless you have already hammered that into an excessive degree, then the idea that some boys like boys, some girls like girls, or whatever, is not difficult for a kid to understand. You know what's a lot harder for people to understand is if you miss the window when they were first starting to learn about this and they get older and then are confronted with these ideas because these people exist and they react with shock, horror, confusion, or anger because somebody exists that doesn't fit into the tiny worldview that you instilled into your child. So, as you can tell, I get a little bit heated about this. Not just as a queer person, but as a parent. If you are instilling such small-mindedness into your child, if you are so insistent to limit their experience of the world so much that the very notion of anybody being gay could throw your child into utter chaos, I don't believe you are an audience who should be catered to. I don't think that is a healthy way to raise any kid. Now, am I saying you tell kids everything about everything as soon as they have language comprehension? No. Some ideas are complex. Some ideas are complicated. Emotionally complicated, logistically complicated, whatever it might be. And they need to be dealt with at later points in life simply so that the child can more fully process them. But gay people is not a complicated concept. It's not. And insisting that it is and that it only be taught later, or indeed not be taught at all, even at a high school level or a college level, the way some of these people talk, then you literally have the goal of putting blinders on children until they are adults and then letting loose ignorant adults on the world who will likely be very hostile to all the stuff that you refuse to teach them about. It should kind of go without saying, but I'll make it very clear. These statements and the idea that a gay character is $100 million therapy, but anything Pete Docter made isn't, that's hypocritical at best. And the idea that giving any amount of queerness to a piece of work and that somehow forcing an uncomfortable conversation and, oh, we don't have any business to do that when you are happy to make a movie about death and make it very clear all the things that you have absolutely no problem putting into your movie that might be very difficult conversations for certain families, you have decided that gayness is somehow worse than all of that. And that is homophobic. These parameters, these notions, these ideas, these statements are homophobic. Now, I word it that way for a specific reason. I am drawing the line at calling Pete Docter himself a homophobe. Because I don't know the man. I cannot read the man's mind. I do not know what's in his heart. But I can comfortably say that the statements he made and the ideas he put forward in that interview with the Wall Street Journal are homophobic. Whether or not he is personally, I don't know. I'm sure some people who are more invested in finding the bad guy in any given story would point out things like the fact that he is publicly acknowledged as a Christian. I would point out that there is a massive difference between being religiously Christian and being politically Christian. We are currently living in the nightmare scape that is caused by political Christianity, not necessarily religious Christianity. There is overlap, of course, but I think that is actually an important distinction. As far as Pete Docter is concerned, he brought it up once in an interview in the late 2000s, hasn't really brought it up since. So the idea that he is a religiously driven bigot is, I will say, not impossible. It's certainly possible, but also a big extrapolation based off what we actually know about him. And I'm sure people more apt to defend Pete Docter will point out there has been some degree of queer representation, including in movies that have come out since he's been in charge. There has been small moments in things like Lightyear, or one of the supporting characters in Onward.
My girlfriend's daughter got me pulling my hair out, okay?
But I think it's also very clear that there is a very hard ceiling in terms of Pete Docter's desire for mass market appeal, because can there be just a couple of characters who are the same gender kissing like in one shot? Sure. Can there be one small side character acknowledging a same gender partner? Sure. Main character though? Because to give a main character any of that means that you put an actual queer, gay, trans, whatever it might be, perspective into your artwork. To have Elio be gay coded means that it brings a gay perspective to the world. And that won't be allowed. To give the trans character from Win and Lose a dedicated episode exploring the transness, that means you have given a queer perspective and put that out in the world. And that isn't allowed. So the token little bits of representation, which were already easily mocked because of how cynical they always felt. And look, again, some of them predate Docter being in his position, but they carried on under him pretty much the same. You have had opportunities to do more. And not only did you choose not to, you shut down the attempts to have those things exist. But again, I am not comfortable saying definitively that I believe Pete Docter to be a homophobe. His words, statement, and actions contribute to homophobia, for sure. But here's what I am comfortable in saying. If Pete Docter is not himself personally homophobic, then he is a coward. That I am very comfortable saying. I'm going to diverge for a quick moment. You'll understand why when I circle back. The last office job that I actually held for 9 years. I worked in sales. I worked at an office, did the 8 to 6 thing. Yeah, 9 to 5, I wish. And over the course of that job, I had 3 different bosses. And I got 3 very distinctly different flavors of bosses. My first boss that I had there was kind of an exhausting human being, I'm not going to lie, but he was somebody who had my back. He was somebody who always expected and wanted me to hit my sales goal numbers at any given month. But if it ever looked like I wasn't going to, he didn't chastise, he didn't berate. What he did was sit down with me and go, okay, so what do you need? How can I help? What plan can we come up with to try and repair this? And if we can't make this month, what can we do to guarantee that we make next month? I'm here for you. What resources do you need? He was very quick to put himself between not only me, but the entire sales team and upper management. He was the buffer. Upper management went to him, and then he took what they wanted and figured out how to get the team to execute it in a way that was never demanding, that was never unreasonable. He was, again, kind of an exhausting human being, but he was someone who protected his team. My second boss that I had there was someone who did not care. He was somebody who cared about nothing but the numbers. All he wanted to hear from you is, are you going to hit your numbers? And if the answer was no, maybe he'd ask why not, but he definitely had no interest in helping you figure out how to do it. If the answer was no, he would tell you, well, figure it out and do better. And that was it. I won't say he did no work to try and bring down to earth the expectations of the people above him and make them more reasonable when they asked for unreasonable things, but he only did that to a certain degree, and then ultimately all he expected to hear from us on the sales team was, yeah, I can do that. And if the answer was no, you better figure out how you can. And then finally, the last boss that I had there was a coward. He was actually somebody with no real sales experience, and I think he was hired very specifically for that reason because he didn't know what he was talking about. He didn't know what was or wasn't reasonable from the people above him. He didn't know when they asked for something that was completely unrealistic or a target that was not a fair thing to put onto the sales team. And so he just relayed everything that was said to him by upper management. He was just a funnel for what they wanted. He had no spine, as beautifully emphasized by the fact that when I got laid off and I was brought into the conference room with him and the head of HR did all the talking and he stared at his shoes. He didn't say a word and he didn't look me in the eye. Pete Docter's a coward because if he's not homophobic, if he is not personally, because of his own negative feelings towards queerness and gayness, making these decisions, then it means that he is failing to protect, shield, or empower the people underneath him. And he is a cowardly boss. Because let's be really clear, Pete Docter is not the end boss of the issues in entertainment in general, and definitely not at Disney. He may or may not be the source of the problems at Pixar, but Pixar wasn't involved in the shelving of the trans-focused episode of Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. Pixar wasn't involved in the massive undermarketing of Strange World. That was Disney Studios. There is a much bigger problem at Disney overall, and it starts a heck of a lot higher than Pete Docter. But if he's not homophobic, then he doesn't have the spine to protect the artistic intent of the people underneath him. He is either being told, tone down the queer shit and doing it, or he is doing so preemptively before word of that gets any higher than him so that he doesn't have higher-ups breathing down his neck. In either case, rather than helping the artistic intent of what is meant to be an artistic medium, and what is meant to be an artistically motivated company, he stamps out the voices of queer creators, either because he was told to, or he assumes that's what's wanted anyway, and he's just going to go ahead and do it himself so they don't get on his ass. And if he's just a coward, then he's a coward who's happy to throw queer creators at Pixar and queer audiences all under the bus if it means nobody above him is breathing down his neck and putting pressure on him. He'd rather send a message to everyone under him that if your personal touches and reflections of your own lived experience aren't mainstream enough, then you better keep them to yourselves. Or I guess, tell them to your therapist. If he had a spine, when told by higher-ups, hey, what's with the gay stuff, he would say, it has a purpose, it has a core message, I think it's valuable, we're putting it out there. He'd actually have to put his neck on the line for his employees, his theoretically maybe friends, I don't know. But he won't do that. Most executives won't, to be clear. He's not unique in this. By and large, most executives in this kind of position at a company like Pixar won't stick their necks out. They are not interested in helping to care for and build up something unique that maybe the higher-ups wouldn't believe in and help that come to full fruition. They are interested in avoiding failure. That has a completely different set of motivators and leads to completely different actions. One results in you looking for the best ideas so you can nurture them. The other has you looking for what you think are the ideas that might fail and stamping them out. It is a completely different way of managing from what is meant to be a creative position. And if it isn't motivated by personal bigotry because he doesn't like or isn't comfortable with gay people or queer people or trans people, then it's because he's a coward. So which is it, Pete? Do you not like us? Or are you too cowardly to stand up for us? I don't know which it is. I can't prove which it is. But I feel comfortable saying I have a hard time believing it's something other than one of those two. Is there a third option? Float it if you think there is one. But those are what makes sense to me. Because again, Pete Docter, while he might be in an executive position now, he's not an empty suit. He is an artist. He's made art. He's made incredibly personal art. But he thinks that people who want to make art about their gay or their trans experience, no, they don't get to do that. And he has tried to justify it very poorly by invoking parents, invoking this very dismissive idea of $100 million therapy. But underneath all that, there's something else. Be it bigotry, be it cowardice, be it a mix of the two. I don't know. But I think it was important to look past the therapy line that everybody already dunked on and really digging into what is happening. And how even if we replace him, if he gets fired, if he retires, if he gets moved to a different position, somebody else gets put there, that's unlikely to change much. Because as I said, there is plenty of evidence that this is coming from higher up in Disney. Now, you get somebody else there, might they be brave enough to stand up for a queer project? Maybe. Doesn't seem too likely. It doesn't seem like an environment that is encouraging people to stand up and stand by what they want anymore. It is a company that now encourages people to take the edges off, sand it down, bland it up, and that is better than making a statement if that statement is queer. So while I try very hard not to do personal attacks, and as I said, don't harass the man, but just for my own personal ventilating of my frustration, I do just kind of have to say out loud on camera, fuck you, Pete. And there we go. What are your thoughts on any of this? Again, I know I just said fuck you to a man who I don't know and who will almost definitely never see this video, but let's try and keep it more or less respectful. If you need to express your frustration, by all means, go for it. But be careful about extrapolating about the man's personal character, or definitely do not be saying anything that issues threats or makes unsubstantiated claims about him. That I'm not going to tolerate. You need to vent your frustration? You can do that. I just did. But for now, we're going to leave it at that. Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like, share, and subscribe. They all help, but don't worry too much about it. What I really want you to remember, no matter what kind of boss you have, whether you feel nurtured or stamped on for who you are and how you try to express yourself, you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council, and I am just trying to run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Zubin Lafula, Auntie Kate 808, Mary G, Angry Casperol, Dave Hall, Oliver B, Mystic Shadow, Sean Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Melissa Pedersen, Becky Sparks, Ulrich, Twilord, Tracy Scrabbit, Pal Barabajoggle, Sir Didymus is my favorite, and to thank some folks from the lower tiers: Cyborg Ex Machina, Alex, and Lightning Spirit. You know, I've been saying Angry Casperol for ages, and I almost said Angie Casperol. You are distracting, the whole lot of you.